You keep praying. Not just once. You pray every day. You repeat the requests. You change the words. You insist. And still, it feels like you're talking to yourself. It's not that you stopped believing. It's not rebellion. It's not spiritual negligence. You're doing exactly what you were always told was right. Pray, persevere, trust. But the feeling is strange. Heaven seems closed. Nothing happens. No clear answer. No obvious sign. No perceptible change. The discomfort isn't just the lack of an answer. It's the prolonged silence. It's continuing to speak and feeling no return at all. It's praying sincerely and finishing with the impression that nothing was heard. And almost always, guilt comes with it. Maybe you think you're doing something wrong. That your faith has weakened. That there's some hidden sin. That if God isn't answering, the problem must be you. But that conclusion is born more from anxiety than from truth. The Bible never treats God's silence as automatic proof of guilt. In many moments, silence appears precisely when the relationship moves into a deeper level, no longer shallow, no longer superficial. The problem is that most of us learn to pray expecting a very specific kind of response. Something immediate. Something perceptible. Something that quickly confirms we're on the right path. When that doesn't happen, the feeling of abandonment appears. But maybe the issue isn't whether God stopped responding. Maybe the issue is how you learn to recognize a response. In practice, many people associate divine response with sensation, immediate relief, clear signs, visible changes. And when none of that happens, the conclusion seems obvious: silence. But the biblical text is far more complex than that. There are moments when God responds by guiding, others when he responds by confronting, and there are moments when he responds by sustaining, without explaining anything. David, for example, was not ignored when he wrote, "How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever?" That question isn't born from lack of faith, but from the intimacy of someone who keeps speaking even without a clear response. And the silence there is not rejection. It is space. Space for something that cannot be built with ready-made phrases. Space for a faith that does not depend only on immediate emotional return. When prayer seems not to go past the ceiling, what hurts isn't only the waiting. It's not knowing how to interpret what's happening. You keep speaking, but you no longer know how to listen. You keep waiting, but you no longer know what to expect. And maybe that's exactly where the conflict lives. Not in the fact that God is silent, but in the fact that no one ever taught you that silence is also part of the language of faith. Because not every answer comes as an explanation. Not every presence comes with sensation. Not every care comes with a visible sign. And what if silence isn't absence, but a kind of answer we never learned how to hear? There is a part of faith that is almost never spoken out loud. Not because it doesn't exist, but because it's uncomfortable. The part where God remains silent. Most people grow up hearing stories of quick answers, clear deliverances, visibly answered prayers. But almost no one is prepared to deal with the other side of the biblical text, the moments when people deeply intimate with God pray, and nothing happens. Job is an impossible example to ignore. He loses everything: health, children, security, reputation. And he prays. A lot. Not superficially. He argues, questions, cries out, insists. 4 entire chapters. God does not respond. He does not correct. He does not explain. He does not comfort. Heaven remains closed for a long time. And the text does not try to soften this. It does not say Job had hidden sin. It does not say he lacked faith. The silence is simply there. David lives something similar. In several Psalms, he speaks directly about this feeling. My God, why do you remain silent? How long will you hide your face from me? That is not the language of someone distant. It is the outcry of someone who knows God well enough to miss him. These texts were not written after everything was resolved. They were written in the middle of emptiness, in the middle of waiting, in the middle of unanswered prayer. And perhaps the most uncomfortable example is Jesus himself. On the cross, he does not quote just any verse. He chooses the psalm that begins with, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This is not performance, not lack of faith. It is the real experience of silence at the most extreme point of pain. If silence exists even there, it becomes difficult to maintain the idea that silence always means rejection. The Bible does not protect our fragile theology. It records what happened, including what doesn't fit simple cause and effect logic. The problem is that we learn to read these texts too quickly. We rush to the ending, to the answer, to the resolution. We ignore the time when nothing happened. And when that time arrives in our own lives, we think something went wrong. But maybe the error is in the expectation we created. The expectation that intimacy with God eliminates silence. When in reality, the text shows the opposite. The deeper the relationship, the more real the experience, even when it hurts. Biblical silence does not appear as automatic punishment. It appears as part of the process, as a space for maturation, as territory where faith stops depending on immediate return. If these men passed through silence without being rejected, maybe silence isn't the sign we learn to fear. Maybe it's a chapter no one ever taught us to read slowly. And if even they went through this, why do we think silence means rejection? There is a delicate point in spiritual life that almost no one notices while it's happening. It's not when God disappears. It's when He stops responding the way we expect. Many people call this silence. But in many cases, it isn't absence of response, it's loss of control. Without realizing it, we learn to structure prayer as a predictable script. We ask, we insist, we reinforce, and deep down, we expect confirmation. Confirmation of decisions already made. Confirmation of paths already chosen. Confirmation of expectations prepared before prayer even begins. When the response comes outside that script, the feeling is immediate: God didn't answer. But maybe He did answer. He just didn't validate what was already decided. This appears repeatedly in Scripture, even if it's not always read this way. Israel in the desert asked God which way to go, but only accepted the answer as long as it aligned with their desires. When the response involved waiting, dependence, or discomfort, they called it abandonment. The same happens with Saul. He seeks God's guidance, but when silence comes, it's not because God stopped existing. It's because Saul had already crossed internal limits. He didn't want direction. He wanted authorization. When authorization doesn't come, he forces an alternative. Silence, in this case, is not divine indifference. It is a boundary. There is a very common illusion in spirituality, that intimacy produces predictability, as if knowing God meant knowing exactly how He will act, as if faith were the ability to anticipate divine moves. But the Bible never presents God as predictable. It presents Him as faithful, which is very different. Predictability generates control. Faithfulness demands trust. When God responds in unexpected ways, He dismantles a faith based on domination. And that hurts. Because control offers psychological security, the feeling that if we do everything right, the result is guaranteed. But that logic was never promised. Abraham receives a clear promise, but not a timeline. He walks for years without visible response. Moses is called, but spends decades in the desert before any practical confirmation. The disciples followed Jesus expecting one kind of kingdom and receive something completely different. In all these cases, silence is not the end of the relationship. It is the end of the illusion that God works as automatic confirmation. When God ceases to be manipulable, faith enters crisis. Not because God changed, but because the relationship changes level. Prayer stops being a tool of control and becomes a space of exposure, where intentions can no longer hide, where expectations are confronted, where decisions must be revisited. This is the moment many people give up. Not because God went silent, but because He stopped confirming what was already decided. Silence begins exactly there, when faith must choose between trusting or trying to regain control by other means. And this discomfort is not rejection. It is forced maturity, because a faith that only works when God confirms our plans is not trust. It is negotiation in disguise. Silence begins exactly when God stops confirming what you already decided. When silence appears, almost no one stays still. The most common reaction is not waiting, it's filling. More activities, more meetings, more videos, more isolated verses, more ready-made phrases to avoid dealing with what's happening inside. Silence is uncomfortable because it offers no distraction. It gives no task. It delivers no immediate sensation. It demands presence. And presence is frightening. Faced with silence, many people don't ask what God is doing. They ask what else they can do to avoid feeling the emptiness of the unanswered prayer. So religion becomes continuous movement, a sequence of practices that keeps everything busy enough to avoid stopping. This doesn't happen out of malice. It happens out of self-protection. Religious noise works as emotional anesthesia. It reduces anxiety, gives a sense of spiritual productivity, creates the impression that something is being done, even when nothing is being heard. You pray, but you don't wait. You read, but you don't digest. You serve, but you don't notice. Everything keeps spinning, but the conversation doesn't deepen. The Bible shows this very clearly. Elijah does not find God in the strong wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire. He finds him in the sound of a gentle whisper, something that can only be perceived when everything else stops. But the problem is that we got used to looking for God in noise, in impact, in constant stimulation, in sensation. When silence comes, it feels like something is wrong. So we try to compensate. The Pharisees did this. They multiplied practices, rules, discourses. Jesus does not confront them for praying too much, but for turning practice into performance. A lot of movement, very little listening. Silence demands something noise avoids: honesty. It reveals frustrated expectations, shows confused motivations, exposes how much our faith depended on immediate return. That's why silence is so frightening. It cannot be controlled. It does not respond under pressure. It does not compete with noise. God never fought for attention. Throughout Scripture, He never shouts to be heard. We are the ones who shout when we cannot bear being alone with what we feel. And the more noise we make, the less we perceive. Not because God moved away, but because there is no internal space to listen. Perhaps this is one of the most subtle dangers of spiritual life, not abandoning God, but replacing Him with constant activity. At this point, an honest pause matters. If this kind of reflection resonates with you, if you felt that the issue isn't lack of faith but excess noise, staying close makes a difference. Not out of loyalty to a channel, but because conversations like this require continuity, time, and willingness to think. Subscribing is less about supporting someone and more about creating space for this kind of conscious silence in the middle of so much distraction. Returning to the central point, silence doesn't ask for more effort. It asks for less. Less automatic speech. Less anxious filling. Less attempt to control the response. Maybe God is not silent. Maybe you never stopped talking. And as long as noise remains the response to discomfort, silence will always seem like absence, when in fact, it may be invitation. An invitation to a faith that does not depend on constant stimulation, nor on immediate confirmation, but on real presence. And that, although uncomfortable, is where the relationship stops being mechanical and begins to be real. When silence drags on, the first thing we try to save is explanation. The second is sensation. The third is control. But there comes a point where none of that answers anymore. And that's when silence begins to fulfill another function, not punishment, but transition. In Scripture, silence almost never appears as punishment. It appears as passage. Abraham receives a clear promise, but walks for years without new instructions. Joseph dreams of authority, but passes through the pit, prison, and forgetfulness before any response. Moses spends 40 years in the desert after being sure of his calling. John the Baptist, who publicly recognizes Jesus, ends his life without any explanation for his own death. Silence does not cancel the calling. It dismantles the old way of relating to it. There is a faith that works by exchange. I do, God responds. I obey, God confirms. I pray, something happens. That faith is understandable. It begins early. It helps you start. But it cannot sustain an entire life. Because when God goes silent, that logic dies. And that death hurts. God does not die. Faith does not die. What dies is the need to use God as emotional guarantee. What dies is the expectation of spiritual predictability. What dies is the idea that intimacy is measured by quick answers. Paul experiences this explicitly. He asks for deliverance 3 times. he doesn't receive it. He receives permanence. My grace is sufficient for you. It is not the answer he wanted, but it is the one that forms someone whole. Silence does not form louder believers. It forms more aware people, less anxious, less dependent on signs, less conditioned by sensation. Jesus himself experiences this at the limit. In Gethsemane, he prays, insists, suffers. He does not receive immediate relief. He receives strength to remain. On the cross, he does not receive an answer. He receives silence, and he passes through it. This reveals something fundamental. Silence is not absence of relationship. It is its deepening. When God is silent, he is not testing your resistance. He is removing crutches. Childlike faith asks, what do I get from this? Mature faith asks, who am I becoming while this doesn't change? That is why silence is so uncomfortable. It does not negotiate. It does not explain itself. It does not adapt to our urgency. But it reveals. It reveals motivations. It reveals dependencies. It reveals how much our faith was anchored in results, not relationship. When something in you dies in this process, it is not loss. It is pruning. It is the end of utilitarian faith and the beginning of a faith that remains even when it does not understand. A faith that does not need constant reward. That is not measured by visible response. That does not collapse in the face of delay. Maybe what you are living is not rejection, nor abandonment, nor spiritual failure. Maybe it is maturity arriving without asking permission. Maybe God has not stopped responding. Maybe he is simply calling you to a faith that no longer depends on answers.